Hey everybody, good evening. Welcome. No need to drop a gavel because this is not a council meeting. This is a public work session with the Havre de Grace City Council and my administration to go over with what Tool Design has to present with their engineering. So far what they have on the project, downtown restoration. I do want to welcome everybody. I see a lot of familiar faces and friends in the audience, and thank you for participating and being interested in the progress as this momentous project is underway. I have a few words to say just real quick before I hand it off to Mr. Seipolt, who's going to then introduce the Tool Design team. So obviously it was over a year ago that we came pretty public about the desire of the council and administration and a lot of citizens to invest a good chunk of this American Rescue Plan money into our historic downtown. At the time, we were limited in guidelines for what we could exactly spend that money on, but one thing that we could spend all that money on was infrastructure replacement, as well as how we put the downtown back together when we replaced these 100-plus-year-old pipes and lines and things like that. And it became pretty much a mission of believing it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to make the downtown probably one of the most beautiful ones on the East Coast of the United States, something that generations of citizens will enjoy. And we're in the process of doing that. And then this time last year, Tool Design held several charrette sessions. And I know almost everybody in this audience, I remember just being on the Zoom calls, participated, most people. And so we took that consensus from those charrette sessions, and Tool Design packaged up what the general direction was and from the citizens, from all the input, from all stakeholders. And what you're going to see tonight is about a 30% rendition of the engineering design of what came from those sessions. So it's important that as we watch this and listen to what Tool Design has to present to us, that we keep in mind this is a product of the community. We had a lot of participation. We had a lot of ideas. And we try to take the best of them. But also at the same time to respect the integrity of the process, of the charrettes, and of the input. You know, what you're going to hear and see tonight is the path we're on. Now, I always say, you know, we're no better than any other slimy government if we took everyone's input last February, March, and May, and we didn't execute what the people told us. I want everybody to keep that in mind, because everyone has opinions. Everyone has good ideas. But we wanted to stay true to the mission that when we asked people for input, that we did not waste your time. We listened to what everyone had to say. So we're excited what we're doing here. This is big. This is huge. This is going to change our downtown, like I said, for generations to come. So I'm very thankful people are here this evening to listen. I do have to remind everybody, I apologize if people are here this evening because they wanted to speak. These public work sessions are designed to educate the council and the administration. The reason why we had to make it a public announcement is because 6 of these folks can't be in the same room, or more than 3 can't be in the same room without the public knowing about it. So if you're here to speak tonight, it's not a comment session, but I would tell you, I mean, I'm sure the council members wouldn't mind talking to you afterwards, or a phone call, an email, or you can come to any council meeting. We have another council meeting Tuesday night. And feel free to speak under citizen comment about what you heard here tonight if you have ideas. But I just want to remind everybody respectfully that tonight is to listen to the presentation and perhaps any dialogue that the council might give to presenters. So with that said, Happy New Year, everybody, and thank you for being here. We appreciate your interest in what's going on in the city. I'm going to hand this off to Mr. Seipolt, who is the city's project engineer lead. Roll call. Excuse me one second. Let me do roll call. Got so excited about talking about the project. Okay, Public Works Session, January 10th, 2023. Council President Ringsacker.
Here.
Councilmember Shanegas.
Here.
Councilmember Boyer.
Here.
Councilmember Robertson.
Here.
Councilmember Zinner.
Here.
Councilmember Martin. Was not able to make it this evening. Okay, the roll call is completed. Mr. Seibold, please proceed.
Well, thank you, Mayor, and good evening, City Council, and good evening, citizens. It brings me great pleasure to come before you a second time to talk about our downtown revitalization and where we're at in this project, though I won't be doing most of the talking. This project is the genesis from funding from the American Rescue Plan Act, otherwise known as ARPA, which was to replace and repair our downtown infrastructure, which is water, sewer, stormwater, and putting our city back, as the mayor said, in the most efficient and effective manner. As you know, BGE recently completed the replacement of their natural gas distribution system throughout the downtown area. They completed their 5th phase of a multi-phase program encompassing several years. And as the mayor alluded to, it's been a year since we started this process with a series of meetings engaging our community through a charrettes process. The project update that we are presenting to you tonight is the execution of the vision that was garnished from those community meetings. Understandably, as the mayor noted, every idea cannot be incorporated. However, the consensus is represented in these 30% renderings. The purpose of this project, keep in mind, is to create an open, walkable, accessible, and shared use space to include wider sidewalks, a healthy and consistent tree canopy, curbless streets, linear parks, and a small plaza. The city, after performing its due diligence, engaged with Tool Design to take us through the design of our construction documents to achieve the purpose I just mentioned. To date, we have completed the existing conditions investigation, which was included a topographic survey and subsurface utility engineering. We completed a preliminary environmental review services, which is natural and cultural review services determining permitting requirements. Also, the Maryland Department of the Environment did an on-site pre-application meeting. And now we have completed our 30% design for the Priority 1 area. Tonight, Tool Design, and more specifically, Elizabeth Gillum, Rob Pinkney, and Ian Lockwood will present this evening their conception. To ensure everyone has a complete knowledge of the steps that have brought us here tonight, Ian will provide a look back at the early development, while Elizabeth and Rob will focus their portion of the presentation on the project as it stands today at 30%. Additionally, they will go into next steps in bringing this project to final design and implementation. And with that, I ask your indulgence as we begin our presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Seibold.
Well, good evening, Mayor, councilors, directors, and folks at home and folks here. Happy to be back. I'm really happy that you're at 30%, and I'm really looking forward to when you're at finished construction, because I can't wait to come back and see how it is. So there we are. There's the 3 of us here tonight. I just want to thank the staff again for doing such a thorough public involvement. Considering there's a pandemic going on, we had hundreds of people involved virtually. We had people come in and visit us. We had staff coming in and visit us, working around the plans. And so there's a lot of cross-pollination and ideas and things discussed together. And during that time, we shared a lot of things with you. And here's some examples of shared spaces from around the world. And we also shared with you ideas about how to design main streets to make them successful and support the businesses. We discussed about flush streets, how to make streets such that people with mobility impairments can get around equitably. It's something that's becoming increasingly important around the country to reach people of all ages and ability levels. And you shared with us your values and aspirations, concerns, and these sorts of things. And it's a great summary list here. You wanted a place where your community could come together and spend time together, celebrating, shopping, all these sorts of things. You wanted flexibility. Right now, most streets are designed as for fixed uses only, but you use your downtown for all sorts of things. And we wanted a downtown that could be accommodating of all your festivals and other things you do downtown. Make the businesses thrive. We know how to increase exchange and success on shopping streets and on main streets. We design main streets in all different sorts of contexts all around the country, and we can start to see patterns. We look at other people's projects and we see what works and what doesn't. And most importantly, we have to custom make it to suit your culture, your geography, your history, and that's what we did together with you. So to get those businesses thriving and a great place for all those other things you do downtown. There's a whole environmental angle that we do now, which makes a lot of sense. I'm not the expert on that, that's these guys, but that's important. And durability of materials and longevity and being able to maintain things, that's something that we take into account. One nice thing about flush streets is you don't have those little linear barriers, which makes it difficult to plow. It's actually easier to sweep and clean. So you can actually have it, make it easier to maintain. Legible and intuitive, that's really important. We want people to make it like a cognitive map of what's going on and understand it, which increases their comfort with the place. And so when this is done, everybody will know what Main Street is, how to behave, how to use it, because it's self-apparent in the design. And we want it to be usable all year, winter, summer, and so forth. So we think we've got it in the design, and we took the designs a certain distance in the charrette, and these folks have been taking it further up to 30%. They still have 70% to go, but it's been advanced nicely. Bottom line is when we're done, we want a great place. There's a lot of one-liners. We want to do this well, we want to do this well, but in totality, it's got to be a great place. And this is how people will identify with your city, your place. This is why people will be proud to be from here when they say, where are you from? I'm from Havre de Grace. This is where your postcards will be made in your downtown. Your streets will reflect your history, unlike they do today. The streets look very conventional today. One of the things that we think we did well is to match the sort of intent of the original designers with slower speeds and cultural and economic and social exchange happening. And that will be reflected in the design and in these postcards which will be made once this is open. And then we drew things. We do draft things. We had people critique them. We changed them. We altered them. We tweaked them. And this is just a sample of the things that we drew and looked at. And we looked at all your historic photographs. And people came in and described, the history of the place and why it's like it is, which was fascinating. And this revitalization plan changed a little bit during the course of the charrette to more of the restoration plan, because you had all this stuff. And part of the history of most cities across the United States is that streets got specialized for motoring over time, and less social and economic exchange happened downtown. Value was exported out of downtown, and malls got developed and other things, big boxes and so on, and it competed with your downtown. We don't need to compete with those types of land uses. We have the history, the culture, and all kinds of things to draw people in here, and that's the kind of thing we need to celebrate and express in our public realm. So it's more of a restoration effort, dealing with contemporary issues. So that's what this was about. So why do we have cities in the first place? Why were they invented 10,000 years ago and have kept going? We invented cities to bring people together for the purposes of exchange. And these are the sorts of things that get exchanged in cities. And we always think about goods and services, but it's more than that. It's ideas, it's labor, it's jobs, it's opportunity, it's culture. These things get exchanged in your cities. We want to create the space to allow all of that to happen, social capital to get built and that kind of thing. And that's what's happening in your downtown. It always has, and we want to encourage it to happen even more. So here's a drawing of your downtown from a long time ago. And it's fascinating to look at these things because all of that's happening in your downtown historically, and it happened a lot on your streets. So here are the purposes of streets historically. Streets were used in Havre de Grace for all these things: socializing, celebration, recreation, travel, and other things besides operational things. They create your identity, the legibility of your place, and the place itself. This is how people identify with it. So that's what we're trying to express in the streets, all of these different purposes. And historically, streets in every city in the United States, up until World War II, were shared spaces. There were no such thing as traffic signals or crosswalks or any of these things. People negotiated the space with using their interpersonal skills. And as we tried to speed up the streets, we had to introduce what are called traffic control devices, all the stop signs and stop bars and signals and all this sort of thing, so that we could drive faster. And that wasn't healthy for downtowns across the country. And so in a lot of our projects in downtowns, we're restoring the speeds of the original intent, slower speeds, so more exchange can happen, there's more interpersonal contact, and you can start not having as many traffic control devices to do the communicating for us. So that's kind of a primer for this, because we think streets are a key piece of your public realm and should be truly a multi-purpose public space. So I'm just going to blow up this picture a little bit, that part with the yellow bar around it. And it's interesting, the artist who drew this picture ages ago drew a lot of people who are getting pulled around by their horses or walking. The entire city operated at 4 to 8 miles an hour. That's how this whole place was designed until the motoring became popular after World War II. And then you have the train going down Pennington and just north of the city, right down to the water. And then you had, of course, the boats. And so all of these different modes came together to advance social and economic exchange. So it's a very multimodal place. So here's the history of cities in a timeline, and cities have been around for about 10,000 years. For most of that history, we walked, and it's only in the last 400 years that we've had a lot of innovation. And cars are the new kid on the block. They've only been around for about 130 years, and they've only been popular for about 75. So it's less than 1% of the time we've had cities, we've had cars. But they've completely changed the definition of street. Prior to World War II, every street was a shared space, but the word street has come to connote something that's for motoring now. So we had to invent a new term called shared space to describe what was around for about 10,000 years. So we're trying to recreate some of the ambiance and charm and so forth that existed before the car began to dominate the streets. Now, the cars are very handy. We're not excluding them. We just want them to play the rightful role in the downtown in terms of access. So the purpose of streets historically is on the left, but a lot of our design guidelines and so forth that were popularized over after World War II was really about travel, higher speed travel by car. And so that's what we're kind of pushing back again a little bit. We're trying to calm traffic so that the pedestrians and the cyclists and shop owners and so forth can have a nicer environment. Well, I'd like to point out that high-speed car travel isn't really important in Havre de Grace downtown. You're not on a major route. There's no major state routes going through your downtown. And if you kind of squint, you're kind of like on a peninsula, kind of sticking out to the east. And so there's not a lot of through traffic cutting through your downtown. So that gives you a rather unique ability to really emphasize some of the key attributes that a nice street system can create for commerce, for socializing, for celebrating. And there's other things that are highlighted here, but mostly place. You can make a uncompromisingly cool place just because of your geography. And you can express all of those values that you articulated during the charrette in the designs of your street. So that's what we drew, and that's what we tested, and that's what we adjusted as we spoke to people. Well, I'm just going to focus a little bit on the key intersection there at Green, St. John, and Washington. And it reminded us of this intersection that we've seen in Sweden. And if you look at the top, you can see a intersection with all these streets coming in at various angles. And it was a shared space for most of its history as well. And when motoring became popular, they put in traffic control devices, and they made crosswalks and speed limits and all this sort of thing to help communicate what's going on. And that wasn't working very well. And so they ended up changing it into a shared space, which is that plaza on the bottom. And that's what it looks like today. And it's a very busy intersection, much busier than here, because the bridge that brings traffic through town is just off to the right, and so this is a bit of a through route. But they took away all that sort of traffic control stuff, and it takes actually less time to get through in your car because you're not sitting at a stop sign or a traffic light or anything like that, and you can walk across it. The businesses are doing much better now that it's not so car-oriented. It's safe. There's almost no crashes today. Before there were, because the communication using the traffic control devices isn't as effective as interpersonal communication. So it's been a huge success. And there, I think that's evidence enough that there's some people who would love to drive through there quickly. You know, you don't buy a Lamborghini to crawl around. But look at the two gentlemen just by the art that's in the plaza there. They're not worried. They're quite comfortable. The lady with the purse, the red purse, is quite comfortable. It's actually a nice place to spend time. There's seating on the sides. Folks go through respectfully. And when they have an event, it's a plaza. And it can be completely barrier-free. And it just happens to be on a major bus route as well, but very successful space. And so when we looked at this, we could just picture literally your intersection right on top of it. It's a very comparable situation, except you just have less traffic than they do. So we could imagine a space that's designed for business success and for people and for celebration in that space. And that's the closest we could get to a comparable view. But you can imagine it in your imaginations. And then on your main street, we thought, well, why don't we do something that's also barrier-free and inclusive as per the values that we heard? So we designed a flush space. The water drains to those valley gutters, which are between the parking row and the travelway, with wider sidewalks and street trees that are further from the building so they can actually grow on both sides of the trunk, with a furniture zone for things like trash receptacles, benches, all that kind of thing. A slower travel way. Nobody's in a rush if they're here. They should go through the downtown on downtown's terms. Still accommodates deliveries and that kind of thing. But it adjusts the allocation of the space according to your priorities, and will result in a much more successful street. And these are the sorts of attributes that create successful main streets. And I'll just talk about a few of them that are important here. The most important one is comfort. Oh, that's right. I remember, because when we were in the charrette, that went off in our room. How long does it last? Okay. Oh, okay. All right. I remember it was deafening. So comfortable, that's the most important thing. And so it'd be nice if you didn't have to walk single file in so many places, like if two couples could pass. It'd be nice if people could express their businesses on the sidewalk, either in displays or seating. It would be nice to have the motorists going slower so you don't feel uneasy about speeding. It'd be nice to be able to cross the street with a shorter crossing distance. So all of these things increase people's comfort. We want it to be engaging and accessible. We want the street environment to hold people's interest so they're willing to walk further and shop more and see more and tour more. And then legibility is important. We want it to read like a main street. We want Pennington to operate as that civic spine, linking a variety of parking lots together and some of your most important key buildings, your library and your opera house and so on. And then, but most importantly, we want this to be flexible and equitable so that everybody in the city can come down here and enjoy this space. And when it's a celebration, folks in wheelchairs don't have to go to the end of the block just to get up on the sidewalk. So, And it allows you flexibility not just for events, but even in the course of a day. Like if you wanted to use the parking row for parking, you could. You could pull out a few planters and put it into dining in the evening if you wanted to. So you can change this space up because it's flexible and curbless. You can change it up over the course of a day, on the weekend, or seasonally, depending on your needs. So highly flexible. And some of the things that we thought we needed to emphasize the most, we designed main streets all over, but these are the things that we thought you really need to think about, is getting the sidewalk width bigger, to get the street trees away from the buildings and so that they can be healthy. The flush idea, and get the speeds lower. Those are really important things. In other places that have one-way streets, we typically restore them to two-way, but you already have a two-way street because that literally doubles the access, which is really important for businesses. I'd like to talk about the parking supply because this comes up in every project we do, that everyone's concerned about the on-street parking supply. The reason it does is because everybody who drives a car is familiar with all the issues you have finding a parking space and getting into parking spaces. Doesn't matter where you go, you have to store your car somewhere while you're shopping. And so that's very familiar and top of mind with everybody. Very few people obsess about tree placement and the sense of enclosure. That's not something that's on the top of your mind. Nobody really is concerned about the curb design. A lot of merchants accept sidewalk widths because that's what they're given, and they do the best they can with the street they're on. So people don't think about that very much, but we do. What we're trying to do is align the values with the space we're building and make it a very successful place. So we always hear about on-street parking because that's what people, that affects them in their daily lives every day, and they don't see all these other things and how important they are for the success of the place. This is a highly emotional issue too. There have been projects that have been destroyed because of this issue, where all those other attributes of making a great space were politically not made important, and it was on-street parking supply that dominated the discussion. So all these things are very important. And so is on-street parking. It's like we're putting on-street parking on every street. It is important. But these other things are important too, and it's about allocating the space to get the right totality at the end of the day. So what we're trying to do is all these things, help the businesses thrive and create a great space and so forth. And getting back to the parking thing, we're not trying to just to maximize parking. We want as much as we can, but not at the expense of creating a great downtown. So I have a couple of case studies where this came up. Sulphur Springs, Texas, population about 16,000, small city in Texas. And there's this downtown right in the middle, and it got bypassed in the 1970s. And the economy left downtown and moved to the bypass. So bypass restaurants like Taco Bell and McDonald's and everything went down there. Walmart went down there. We called it the downtown killer. The hardware store couldn't compete and all that kind of thing, and it all went to the Walmart. And so it was about 40 years of disinvestment in the downtown. And it used to be a thriving place, and you can see the Main Street on the bottom right. It's a highly compromised place. The awnings were literally falling off the buildings when we were there. But they had a vision. It's going to be the best small city in Texas for raising a family and celebrating life and doing business. That's much aligned with what your vision is. And that's the before picture. And so we went ahead and drew what we thought would really help the downtown businesses and be a place to celebrate and raise a family. And we were kind of taken aback by how passionate people were about maximizing on-street parking. They thought on-street parking was the problem. And so we were given all of these plans that folks prepared about how to increase the on-street parking. And this is the headline that showed up in the newspaper the next day. Take a hike. This is the welcome we got in Texas. Like who is this East Coast elitist telling us what to do in our dirt? And so they weren't very interested. By the end of the week, though, we had a consensus on what to do in the downtown. And I just couldn't believe that they thought that the issue was on-street parking. when you look at that picture. Now that's the before picture, and that's what it looks like today. And it was mostly empty, and the stores that were there weren't thriving. Today it's a thriving Main Street. They're all filled. The historic buildings have all been restored. That missing tooth, that building that had fallen in the middle, has now been replaced with a beautiful building with 3 homes on top. The trees are growing wonderfully. We got the right soil volumes underneath. The street operates slowly. It's actually narrower than the street that we're suggesting here. It might be a bit too narrow, but here, not in Havre de Grace, but in Sulphur Springs. But it was so important to get that sidewalk width right that we were willing to narrow the lanes to 10 feet each. I think they're 11 feet in what we're proposing here, which makes a big difference, by the way. That margin of 1 foot makes a big difference. So anyway, that street has become hugely successful because we expressed the city's values in the design. This is an example of a before picture down the main street. And all we did was change the public realm, and that's the same building today. And that was all private investment that came helping build a really intact Main Street. And they do all these festivals on the street now. It's a really great place to spend time. And this lady who's getting married, the lady in the white dress, obviously, she was walking down the street with the city manager looking for a good venue for her wedding. And she just stopped and she said, I want to get married here. This is a beautiful place. And that is the acid test, I think, if you created the right environment in your street where she's willing to get married on the main street. And she did. So the city put up some lights and so on, closed the street to motorists, and she had her wedding there. This is the square just at the end of the main street, and it's got these one-way streets around it, which everyone thought was good for getting traffic through and maximizing parking and so forth. That's what it looks like on the ground. And they wanted this parking lot there to compete with the suburbs so people could park easily and access the stores. And we came up with some plans, and we got pushback here too. Even though they had just experienced the renaissance of the main street, they still thought parking was absolutely key for the success of the square. And these are the plans people came in with about how to maximize the parking and make it easier to drive through. And fantastic ideas about making it into even a better parking lot. And that's what we built. All the streets around it are flush. It's a really soft space. People love spending time there. It's got some of the best events in Texas now. They had to rebrand the city from Great Parks, Great People to the Celebration City. There's so many events that go on there now. That's the Cinco de Mayo event, the biggest event in town. The farmers market has grown every year since we did this. And these are what we call free-range children. The streets are so safe that the parents allow their children to go downtown unsupervised, and they're perfectly fine. We created places for people to sit and relax and people watch. This is Connolly Street, and this is the before picture, obviously, and most of those businesses were empty, and this is the after picture. And now it's a very successful street. It's much cooler in the summer, and it's much more beautiful than it was before. So and those businesses are now thriving. This is the square with its flush streets. And this is just one event that they were having. And I looked at this photograph, and I just circled all the people I could see who had an obvious mobility impairment. And those are the ones I could see. Obviously, I couldn't see them all. But there's also people who have impairments that you can't see, a heart issue, a hip issue, and so on. And they're in every community. And it was just felt right to make this accommodating for them. And this is the view today. It's actually beautiful. And people told us, if I can't park in front of the store, I'm not coming downtown. That's how emotional they were about it. And today, they'll park, because it's so popular, they'll park a block away, walk and wait in line to get into a restaurant. And now they have 12 restaurants they can go to instead of the one that was there when we were there before. There's 2 breweries, a wine store, a dress shop, a toy store, an ice cream shop, and so on. So the downtown is very popular. And that's the old drugstore that was vacant for about 20 years. It's now a restaurant with 3 condos on top. And that was typical. All these buildings are starting to to their highest and best use. This building was about to be torn down, and it got renovated. That's just the front lobby. And that's the outside, and it's now at City Hall. So they've kept their historic buildings and fixed them up. Interestingly, the Walmart that helped kill the downtown, just the building is bigger than the square, and the parking lot consumes most of the entire downtown, just to give you an idea of scale. And people talk about, well, I don't want to have to walk that far, from my parking spot. You already do when you go to the Walmart. The second case study is Sanford, Florida, a small city just north of Orlando. And it had angled parking, and it had one restaurant open. It was owned by a German gentleman. It was called what is it called? Hollerbach's something or other. It's on the slide. The Willow Tree, thank you. So there's Mr. Hollerbach, and he owned the store. And we, of course, wanted to make the downtown successful and help the businesses, and so we suggested widening the sidewalks and putting in the street trees and making it beautiful. And he came to every public meeting, every workshop, and he made a passionate case not to reduce the parking supply because his business depended on it. And he watched that street every day. He worked on it. He knew that street. And he's told us every single meeting, I have 8 employees. I make $250,000 a year, and if you take away any parking spaces, you're going to kill me. So he was a bit of a pain in our side the whole time. But we managed to get a consensus on building a better Main Street. And so one of the designers and I were walking down the street a couple years after implementation. We saw this crazy German guy up the street and go, oh my God, there's Tio. And he's waving at us. And I go, oh my, we make eye contact? And so it was too late. I had to go talk to him. And he said, can I bring you into my restaurant? And I want to buy you lunch. And so he apologized for all of his passionate speeches against the design and against the changes. And he said, it's been a couple of years. I now have 43 employees. I make $2 million a year. When you were doing the project, the owner of the building wanted to sell me the building. Now I want the building. He won't sell it to me. Since then, he's expanded several times. He now owns 3 restaurants, and he has these huge festivals on the street. So we ate lunch there, and he says, if you ever need a commercial done about the importance of parking compared to the importance of a great place, I'll be happy to do it. And I really need to take him up on that, by the way. And then we also did their Waterfront Street and a couple other streets, and the influx of private investment was so high that the planning department had to put a moratorium on redevelopment so they could catch up all their planning regulations just to handle the volume. So it was a huge success for that little town. And today, this is his restaurant and some of his festivals, and so he's doing really well. And there's dozens of restaurants around now, and so you just go down there. People don't go downtown to a restaurant, they just go downtown and find a restaurant. It's one of those sorts of places now. So here's your downtown. So I just took the market from up the road about 10 minutes away, the Walmart, and plunked it on top. It takes about 6 city blocks from Green Street all the way past Congress. And so just to think about the walking distances there's some walking distance that are over 1,000 feet just to get to the Walmart. This is the mall, and it's huge. And so we cut part of it off. Oh, yeah, and just to tell you, that's the 2-minute walk. You're going to see some walk contours in a minute. And we put it in your downtown, and it's bigger than your downtown. And so when you go to the mall, you're walking further probably at the mall than you do when you're in downtown.
That's
and so,
Christiana Mall, right?
Pardon me?
That's Christiana Mall.
Yes, that's right. And so when you think about the values that the Walmart used and the mall used for designing their place, they're completely different than the values that you expressed that you wanted to see in your downtown. So we really need to be consistent with our values when we design a place. So these are those attributes of walkability, and I could go through all these other projects, but the pattern's the same. Every one of these other places, we want to design a great place first, and that attracts people investment. And that's really the core of why we apply those attributes to the design. And then we can find lots of downtowns that have maximized their parking, like these 4 downtowns, that are terrible. And you could probably think of some yourself. So maybe I'm beating a dead horse too much, but the point is that there's a lot of things that are important in the downtown, including the parking, but we can't overestimate it and detract from the other attributes that are also important. So we're going to talk about construction documents, and I just want to point out that this is our the way that's sort of like our workflow for a whole project. And at the beginning, there's the design portion that goes into engineering, and then it goes into construction. And during the charrette, we took things to maybe 5 or 10% drawings. And what these folks have been working on here is translating those drawings from 10% to about 30%. And a lot of that is not all that exciting to me. Like, they have to figure out the grades and where the utilities are, all these things that are really important to get right, but aren't hugely important to the average person on the average day. They don't want the street to flood, but they're not going to, they don't really think about it very much. So these folks have been doing all that sort of work with your staff, getting them up to 30%. And they'll talk about more of the granular level of what was involved in taking these cool concepts and making them more real and more constructible. And you're also going to see in the design for the main street, they've incorporated some very cool attributes that help people with vision disabilities, which we didn't really get into during the charrette, but it makes your street much more accessible for even more people who have different types of disabilities, just rather than just folks in wheelchairs. So I think it's really exciting, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the presentation. So thank you.
Good evening. Pleasure to be here. Nice to see a lot of faces again. Welcome. Happy New Year. So great to have you in, kind of bring us back from where we started a year ago and give us a lot of the why and some of the vision and kind of reinvigorate where we've kind of started. And now I get the pleasure of the details and all the granular stuff that he finds boring that I find exciting. Start talking to you all about where we've been and what we've been doing. So it's really kind of been a consistently moving the ball forward from the end of the charrette, as he alluded to. We did a 10% construction document submission to the city. That was really based on a whole bunch of fact-finding, if you will, existing conditions analysis. So we've actually done a topographic survey of the complete downtown area. So we've had our sub-consultant out there. They basically shoot doorway grades, gutter grades, all the exciting things. Count the number of trees, the species, the size of them. So we've got all that existing information. We've also gone underground, subsurface utility investigations to a level B. So for using the scale of school grading A through D for utilities underground, D being record, C being physically locating, B is now we've actually traced with ground penetrating radar, electrical currents, and so forth to get an pretty close to exact underground understanding as close as we can without X-ray vision. So that really helps us as we move forward. And we've done basically a proof of concept for the 10% of so Ian said they drew a lot of pictures, right? So they do a lot of pictures with hand drawings with trace paper over aerial photographs. Now we're taking those ideas and putting them into the CAD program in the computer and drawing straight lines and offsetting them exactly 11 feet. And does it fit from building face to building face? You know, it's gone from would it be nice to, does it actually work? And that was our 10%, and we did it for the whole downtown. And we started that whole streetscape beginnings and started looking at what parts and pieces and like what bench might be nice or what kind of light pole we want to see. And we've done that for the whole thing, the whole downtown. And then we moved on to our 30%. Once we've got some feedback from the city and we've looked at the 10% drawings and we've kind of done some initial utility investigations and coordination. So after doing our X-ray, if you will, underground, we've reached out to all the utility owners. So BG&E, if the city has a water and sewer, utilities for Verizon, communications. We're talking to all of those different entities, and we're trying to figure out what do they have in, capital programs for like BG&E, and how do we avoid some of these conflicts? So then that dictates some of our design decisions. So when we decide to put a tree pit somewhere, we're trying to avoid the brand-new gas line that we just put in, and maximize our space and still keep the vision without diluting it from what the charrette brought forward. And we're happy to report that I think we're right on task. We're finding that we can manipulate and move some things around and still keep the vision intact. And I wouldn't say avoid everything, but we're doing our best to avoid most everything. So as part of the 30%, we submitted that as a Christmas present to the city or a holiday present to the city on the 22nd, so I could take some time off. And it included the CD development of all the engineering details. So there's a list of all the different parts and pieces that went into that. It's about 75 sheets. We've given that to the city, but tonight's going to be a lot more of an overview with the color plans, and I'll dive into some of the details, and I'm happy to answer some questions. But typical sections, so basically taking those charrette drawings and isometrics and creating engineering detail drawings out of it. 11-foot lanes, 7-foot parking, 6-foot furnishing zone, and again, defining like what are those parts and pieces going to be from a paver and what's underground underneath the paver, from a slab supporting it, or what's under the sidewalk as far as aggregate. Some of the more, again, interesting things that I find. So we're diving into those things. Starting to do signing and pavement marking. There's not going to be a lot of it, like Ian alluded to, because we're actually minimizing that quite a bit. But there still is. There's some stop signs and there's some stop bars, but so we're not everything goes, but it's not as big an effort. Maintenance of traffic. So we start talking about how are we going to build these things, right? How do we stage this so that the businesses can stay open and kind of operate while we're tearing up Washington Street or Pennington? And we'll do that in stages, and we'll be back and forth with the city about what's the best and maintaining access to all the buildings. And we've done that. We've taken a first pass of that and given some staging ideas of a half and half, maintaining traffic through the downtown. And we've done projects where we close the downtown, but we want to balance the duration of construction with the ability to still access and keep working. So again, part of the 30% plans. And then we've worked up a development of opinion of probable cost. It's a range right now, right? So again, Ian said we're at 30%, which sounds like, hey, we're really moving forward, but we've still got 70% more to go, right? So we're really starting the initial steps. So there is a range. We're at about $6.5 million to about $8.5 million, depending on all the finishes. So if we go with a granite paver versus a concrete paver, or do we pave versus use an asphalt paving versus a concrete paving, how many benches? So there's a lot of different things that are still up in the air. So that's kind of where the range comes in. We're still investigating some of the conflicts with the utilities and what those impacts are. So again, we've got some variance in there, some range of costs to make sure that we're not basically misleading the city with where we think it's going to land. And today's construction environment is a little tough, right? Pricing and inflation, it's been all over the place. We've actually seen increases of 25 and 30% on normal concrete and other major items. So it's been tough, and I'm sure EJ's probably dealt with that a bit too. So, and then through the 30%, we're establishing all of the nitty-gritty design criteria, things that they've talked about at the charrette, but now we're applying. And again, we're finding through those things. Auto turn analysis. So can we turn both the design vehicle and the emergency vehicle around all the corners? Because we like to tighten up the turn radii and shorten the pedestrian crossings to increase safety, but we still want to make sure that everything can operate downtown. And we've gone so far as talking with your emergency services and getting your Havre de Grace's fire truck, and we've modeled that, and we run it through the corners and see how does it work downtown. So we want to make sure that all that is, and there are pros and cons, and there's gives and takes, right? So there's a little bit of question of where does the stop bar go and what's the allowable encroachment onto, whether it's either on the oncoming lane when we have a stop condition or not, and we treat each intersection differently, and we go through each and every one of those with the city as well. And then photometrics and lighting, we've heard from the city, we like the lighting system that we have downtown. We like the uplighting. So we're trying to maintain all those things, and we're trying to, mimic some of that, but with new fixtures, and we're working with BG&E for those things. So again, a lot of kind of behind the scenes things, but happy to report that, we've taken on the slide here is above is the charrette drawing, the hand drawing, and below is our current colored CAD drawing. And they look pretty darn similar. We haven't really changed shouldn't say we haven't changed, but we've really massaged and modified things to fit, but it's really the same vision. There's the same on-street parking, flush condition, wide sidewalks, lots of tree plantings, tree bulb outs. So like, again, mimicking, keeping the vision alive here and moving it forward. Pennington Avenue, same thing. Above is the hand-drawn, below is the CAD, current CAD, and that's what's shown on both this here and on the table. The Civic Spine area, and now we've got more of the driveways shown, and maintaining the firehouse parking on street as well, after hearing what the city said and having that, making sure that stays in the design. So a lot of green, a lot of trees. Rochambeau Plaza, same thing. Left is the hand drawing from the charrette, right is our current design in CAD. So it fits. It fits both aesthetically, it fits, and physically. So that's the shared space that Ian was speaking about with really kind of, and you'll see multiple uses, vehicles, people, spaces defined with trees and not just a curb line. So it's, again, we'll go through some of that too, and you'll see some of the gray lines that go through. That's a directional indicator for somebody with low vision can find their way through that shared space as well. So I think very exciting. We've also updated the rendering. So you saw Ian, he showed the rendering early from the charrette, and we've now taken that and moved that forward and kind of pulled that into where the design is currently. So you'll see a lot of updates to that rendering on the right of Washington Street looking towards Rochambeau, but you'll see the bench in the furnishing zone, the trees in the furnishing zone, the light pole in the furnishing zone, but the really wide sidewalk that allows people to walk almost 4 wide. It's 10.5 feet. So you can walk hand in hand, or with your daughter or son, or next to you instead of behind you, and you don't have to navigate around any of the benches and trash cans. You have a really clean line. And just to the right of the woman in the pink jacket is that directional indicator that Ian was speaking about, as far as for a vision disability person, they can find their way through that space as well. So again, being equitable and being flexible, and showing that as a flush condition, so that if you did want to, use that parking space for something as a flex space, you have that ability. Or if you wanted to shut down the whole street for a festival, you can, and you can reallocate that space pretty easily. Parking. So we've heard a little bit about the parking, and we just wanted to, obviously dive into that and talk about it a little bit. So within the project limits, we retain about 2 of every 3 parking spaces. So for numbers, 117 out of 188 parking spaces within the priority 1 area, which is that purple area, are retained. So there is a loss of parking, but we think it's well worth the trade-off for what we're gaining. So then we said to ourselves, well, okay, well, what about that Walmart and the Christiana Mall scenario? How does that apply downtown? So we went through and we highlighted really all the on-street public parking and the municipal parking lots marked by Ps within the general downtown area. And then we superimposed that 2-minute walk, and we said, well, how many parking spaces are within that 2-minute walk that we're willing to do basically from the front door of the mall to the food court, and apply that to the downtown. And within that, there's 270 public parking spaces. So basically 117 from the project area plus another 153 within that red circle. Now if we push it out to a 5-minute walk, 5 to 7-minute walk with the average person walking 3.5 feet per second, that's the yellow circle. We've now gained over 1,000 parking spots within a 5 to 7-minute walk of the downtown. And that's from the intersection of Pennington and Washington, counting all the on-street. And we went through and we looked at, we counted all the spots that are striped, and then we counted the on-streets as far as like divvying up the ones that are not marked, and applying actually a kind of, I think, a generous 25 feet to account for some driveways. So 1,000 parking spaces are available within that 5 to 7-minute walk. So just, we feel like that's something that's worth noting. But like Ian said, there's a trade-off, right? Are we willing to park and walk from the food court to the front door of the mall? I'm willing to park and walk downtown for something as well. That's even better. So, looking ahead to next steps, after we'll finish up with a review of the plans here, but the next steps as we move forward here is the final construction documents of the priority 1 areas. So basically, like we said, we're at 30%. That leaves us 70% more to go. But typically, we stop with a 60% submission. Then we go to a 90% submission and 100% submission. And that's really, for us, 60 is really locking everything down, 90 is really detailing everything out, and 100 is really kind of polishing everything up. That's really, so every time we do a submission, it gets more and more detailed to make any changes. So it becomes more and more in-depth, so we're counting the number of light poles and the number of like linear feet of curb. So once we start getting into that granular things, moving things around and changing things becomes more and more difficult and onerous for us. So we want to always check in and kind of build the consensus as we go. And then following that would be construction phase, so that would be getting it out there, advertised for bid, securing a contractor, and getting it under construction. And all through that, there's environmental permitting that we've been working with our subconsultants with as well, stormwater, environmental, cultural. I'm happy to say that all signs indicate that your project will be a fairly straightforward permitting process, but it always takes time. It's a 4-month to 6-month process that we're really pushing on, but we've already been, like Patrick alluded to early, we've already met with MDE, we've already kind of done a little bit of pre-app work, so I think we're headed in the right direction. Schedule. This is aggressive. I will be the first and foremost to say this is an aggressive schedule, but I think we're up to the task, and we're excited about it. It's a super project. We want to see it get going, and we want to see shovels in the ground, but there is a process here to get through. We do have to go out and get some more supplemental information. Now that we've gone through and we've looked at things, there's more questions that we need answered. One of the stormwater runs we need to chase out a little bit. I think it ends up down at the park, at Hutchins Park. That wasn't part of our original survey, so now we're going to go get a little bit more information. That's going to help us make better decisions as we move forward. But then we'll do that in February, given if the council wants to move forward. And 60% CDs, we'd be working on February with a submission in March. Environmental permitting will happen from February all the way through May concurrently with our design, so we'll be checking in with our subconsultant on that as well. And then 90s in March, April, 100s in May. Advertise the project in June, so then usually it's typically out for 3 to 4 weeks, depending on interest and complexity. And then getting it under award, so we'll do a bid opening and review of any of the bids that were received, and we'll give some recommendations. And then get that underway with construction beginning in the fall of 23. So with that, I was going to take a little bit of time and just kind of walk through the color plan that's both here. I think for folks at home, it will be up on the city's website as well in the morning. And then I'll kind of bring the handheld mic up to the front here, and we can kind of I'll walk you through what we have on the color plan, and then we'll open it up for any questions. I'll leave the rendering up for now. Okay. I always feel like I'm on a game show when I start holding this mic. Okay, so just to orient everybody on the color plan that's on the table here, we do have north headed towards EJ. So Pennington runs from left to right in front of me. Washington runs from top to bottom with the 5 points at the top, Green Street to the right of that, and St. John's making that diagonal. Looking at Washington Street, we've kind of showed a little bit of reconstruction at Congress Avenue right now, and I guess it's a good time to talk about, like, this is the priority 1 area. Not everything from the charrette is going to be moved forward because of budget constraints and just the reality of things. So we've put aside some of the areas, including the Congress Street. I think we had showed a compass and some other things, but along with St. John's, some of the other areas will be shown. We're shown in the 10%, but they're not going to be carried forward in the 30% because of cost. So Washington Street, heading from south to north, basically a 2-way with on-street parallel parking on both sides, 2 11-foot travel lanes without a double yellow center line, 7-foot parallel parking spaces with a 6-foot furnishing zone and a 10-foot sidewalk. So in that furnishing zone, there are the tree pits that have structural soil for the trees for mature growth. So very often we'll see in treescapes is if that structural soil or adequate tree planting soil is not provided, the trees hit a certain point and they start to die, or they grow lopsided, or they grow improperly. So it's really a big focus of ours to provide a lot of that. And there's some costs and some challenge to that, but it's well worth it in the long run for sure. So that gives you the ability to really create that corridor for the city as far as with the trees close to the edge of the parking. We have shown some curb extensions that bump out and basically come to the full edge of the parking spaces. That really brings the corridor home. But again, bringing that wide sidewalk for people's ability to walk up and down uninhibited, and giving that view to the storefronts. Additional signage overhead won't be unencumbered, and moving the streetlights out into that furnishing zone out of the sidewalk. So that'll again be something that's not in the way. I know at one point somebody had asked about on-street parking and how do I know where I'm going to park if it's all flush. So the pavers are one color, the furnishing zone is another color. It's very obvious, and then in the furnishing zone is the benches, the trees, the light poles. So it's defined visually, both from a color and kind of usage standpoint, as well as kind of vertically with different elements, but it's not a solid curb line. So that's basically the concept behind Washington, is to give it that flush street, like Ian said, to be flexible, curbless, equitable. Pennington, back to the kind of the charrette, was the civic spine with the firehouse here, the library, the visitor center. So all of these municipal uses kind of in a row. So we were to reallocate the space and include the firehouse parking with a pull-in. I think there's 9 spots here, and I think currently there's 8 or so. I think we've actually given you 1 extra here. But a wide sidewalk down that right side for the civic connection, so you can basically walk from all the municipal buildings. And then we reallocated some of the space in between here as the linear park. So that's going to be a stabilized granite surface. So it gives the ability for you guys to use it again, flexibility-wise, for events and tents and farmers market if you want to. So it's really a little bit of a kind of a blank canvas with some trees to kind of keep it shaded and and kind of pull some of that curb line in and narrow up that roadway a little bit. But it's, again, kind of recognizing the different parts and pieces. Washington Street, I think, is kind of the quintessential main street and kind of the jewel, if you will, whereas Pennington will be an important link, but we've gone to an asphalt pavement instead of a paver setup for cost reasons, and kind of keep it visually on the Washington Street more focused. Parallel parking on the north side of Pennington only. We've actually looked at reallocating and working on some of this private parking here as a potential to eliminate one of the driveway crossings near Lodge Lane. Something we've been back and forth with the city with, and we've given an example for what that could be. And the goal is to kind of make sure we're maximizing what that linear park is, because the more we break it up with driveways, the less it becomes that linear park. So we're trying to maximize what that looks like. Moving north up Washington towards Rochambeau, we've gone from what Ian was talking about, from a flush street on Washington to a shared space. So this is basically no curbs, again, so everything is at the same elevation, but we've gone a step further with a shared space where it's really defined by contrast in pavement and paver materials and patterns. Right now it's shown as a fan pattern. This is really just to kind of illustrate that it's going to be different. This is one of those things that we're working on as far as what does that final detail look like. But it would be pavers, color and pattern to be determined. But again, it's an open space that's defined with trees that are going to be in a tree grate instead of in a tree pit themselves, so they'll be all flush as well. What's noted on here is in the gray are the different directional indicators for the vision impairment help. And you'll notice at the junctions that there are a little bit bigger, it becomes almost a detectable warning surface that gives an indication of I want to have a junction here and I can turn to go to a different location. So again, just trying to make it equitable. We've included space in the plaza we've talked with the city about staging as far as pulling up a portable stage for events, and as we move forward with the design, we'll be looking at what are the power needs for that and providing electrical service for that as well. And then down Green Street, maintaining that same shared space because we're trying to make the connection down to the river and kind of the view shed, knowing that hopefully the transient pier project comes forward for you all, and that we can make that connection and really bring that home as far as this is really what Washington, Rochambeau, down Green Street, and then connect to the river, and kind of bring it all into one big shared space where we really want to have people moving about and feeling comfortable, but spending time and being in a place. So we've kind of reallocated the parking along Green Street to pull in parking with the valley gutter, like we were talking about how we make those drainage connections as well. Not that that's it, but that's the overview. Any questions at this time that we can?
Sure. I just have a couple questions. You said that there were 7-foot travel lanes on Washington. What are they today?
There's 7-foot parking, parallel
There's
parking.
7-foot parking. Okay, so
11
the
foot-
travel
11 foot
lanes
travel
look a
lanes.
little narrower.
It's 11 for the travel portion.
Okay, and
both
it's,
sides.
and it's staying 11.
Yes, so it's in the proposed 7 parallel, 11-foot travel, 11-foot travel, 7 on the other side.
Okay, so that's 22 feet, and that's consistent with what we have today.
Yes.
Okay, so the other thing I just want to bring up, after the last charrette, there was a lot of talk about cobblestones, and I think we had ruled that out, so I'd like to hear for certain that we have, because there was mobility issues, and I said, and I did tell people who asked me that we had discussed it, I thought in depth, at the last charrettes, that cobblestones are difficult for people with disabilities and baby carriages and things like that. So can we put that to rest?
Sure, I guess they are pavers, concrete pavers, smooth finish, so they are not a cobble surface, so they're not rounded, the joints are tight. They are still sand swept, but they are ADA compliant, and we recommend, and these are the things we're talking about with the city, is the underlayment, the structural foundation for that, and part of this next phase will be geotechnical investigations, where we'll go out and actually do some borings and find out what's the soil like underneath your roadways and in general in Havre de Grace, and we'll go through the the exciting engineering discussion of bearing and axle counts, easels for it, to come up with a pavement design that maintains the final surface in a long-term situation, smooth, flush, and ADA compliant.
Okay, and then I think this is my last question, is that we talked about the subsurface for utilities, so we still have, even though we're going to be replacing water and sewer lines, will they be accessible with this paving model? If there's a breakage, if there's a need to dig up the street
Sure.
to look for either a leak or to make a repair?
Yep. So I think there's 2 answers to that question. One is it's always accessible, right? It's just a matter of how difficult or how easy it is. But we find that using pavers, they can come out, they can go back in, and then they look the same. So from a visual aesthetic, that's a win. The challenge is definitely going through a concrete slab underneath it is a little bit more difficult than just cutting asphalt and excavating that. So recognizing that, but which is why we're replacing pretty much all of the utilities in the downtown prior to this project. So the idea is that they'll all be fairly brand new and will last at least another 20 plus years. So I think and I don't want to say, like, your sewers right now are vitrified clay that are basically failing and falling in on themselves that have been in there probably close to 100 years. So we don't expect that you're not going to see leaks and problems with brand new infrastructure, but it's nothing in the world's guaranteed.
Well, there's a financial issue that comes along in terms of the overall cost. And we have to look forward to who's going to sit up here and make these decisions 20 years from now in terms of tearing up this. Are there other options where you can put that paver bed on top of other than cement?
So there are always other options. It becomes a balancing act too. So I would say we would never recommend pavers on any kind of aggregate that doesn't have the structural capacity to hold them, because then you see rutting, then we're into issues with ADA compliance and final surface. You can do a pavement asphalt base, but just like you can get an asphalt base that works for a runway for a plane, but the asphalt thickness becomes substantial. So in order to achieve the stability for the pavers, the asphalt base starts to grow and grow and grow, whereas a concrete base is much more rigid and it maintains itself over the long term. So although you're trading off the depth and challenges of an asphalt base to the depth and cost of a concrete base. But the concrete base is a better fit and finish over the long term.
And then how does that all fit in with the design to have the water seep into
Yeah, no, great
wherever it's
question.
going? And how's that work?
So from a paver standpoint, I think Ian said it already, like, we're gonna have a valley gutter that's located just to the travel side of the parking. So that will have traditional inlets, just like catch basins that you see out there today with grates. Water goes in there, surface runoffs during a storm will go in there. Obviously, some of the water does make its way to the concrete slab, but the concrete slab will have weep holes into it. So basically, any water that hits the top of the concrete slab will run to the sides towards, and there are weep holes that penetrate through. And that amount of water is very small, and then it'll go down into the base and will infiltrate. And again, that becomes part of the geotechnical information that we obtain to find how much water can handle.
Okay, so on the Rochambeau Plaza, our 5 Points area, are you counting on slower traffic to make that safer, or what other things? Because that was a big conversation piece at the last charrette. How were we going to make that intersection safer?
So I'm going to answer that question if I may.
Okay.
I'd also like to just add something to your previous questions.
Okay.
One nice thing about the brick is you get some texture. Cobble would be excessively
Right.
textured. So you want some texture to help with the traffic calming and the ambiance and the beauty of it. Often on most of our streets, it's one texture for the travelway, and sometimes we go a little smoother on the crosswalks just to make it easier for carriages and people in wheelchairs. And as Rob was mentioning, when you put the pavers back, you don't get patches. With asphalt and other types of paving, you get a patched environment. So your street always looks nice after repairs. Then with respect to the safety benefits of whether the calm street or the shared space, when you looked at the photograph of the shared space in a very similar situation, the design of it connotes a different type of behavior by the driver. And you don't need speed limit signs and police officers to enforce it. We call it self-enforcing design. And even if you drive a Lamborghini, it's pretty clear that you need to go slowly. And the results, when you actually look at the statistics for shared space and traffic calm streets, they're far safer than conventionally designed streets. The number of crashes drops, and the severity of the crashes drop. So you can expect fewer crashes and less severe crashes with this design.
So are you recommending like removing the stop signs? Because I think we have 3 there on that corner, and some people have a stop sign,
We're
some people
using
don't.
stop signs to,
You're still using stop signs to slow people down?
yeah, on the approaches, but
Right.
while you're in there, there's no other control.
Okay. All right.
I want to mention one thing that I think was kind of cool for the overview, if I may, or is it too late? Okay. Green Street is a one-way street today, and it's got angled parking. We made it perpendicular because it's almost like it's a little bit of a parking lot for those buildings. But when you do events, you now have the flexibility of the traffic to go the other way. So, for example, and by the way, this is, I think, a private street, which is a shared space today. There's no sidewalks. Everyone walks in the street and so forth. So it's consistent with this little U-shaped loop here along the waterfront. But if you were closing this part of the street, you can operate here on a two-way system. If you close this part of the street, you can operate here. So it gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of routing. When people come in here and park for these businesses, when they leave, they can go back the way they came, which is very convenient. They don't have to go all the way around anymore. So it gives you, the two-way operation gives you a lot of flexibility along your waterfront for events and just for regular daily activity. So I just wanted to point that out, which is a kind of a cool feature there, heading to the water.
Councilman Robertson.
Hey Rob, Liz, it's good seeing you guys in person again. Ian, it's good seeing you in person too. We had a meeting last week and, was able to get a nice overview on this. Going back to your timeline, Rob, you're saying best case, this comes before council May, June, and, goes out for bid July, gets started by about fall 2023. Do you have an approximate timeline on, like, you know, what the construction would take? And that's the tearing up the pipes, putting it all back together and all, because yeah, obviously going into the fall, you're coming into a lot of businesses, busy season around the holidays, so we want to be cognizant of that.
Yeah, and not to be coy with my answer here, but it's going to depend because of different scenarios in traffic control and final disposition on some of the details that we're going to work through, and we'll be kind of back and forth. And one of those factors would be, when do we advertise and what is going to be the final construction scenario and sequence? So I think it's going to be a full construction season at least. So you're going to be fall. You might have a winter break, and then you're going to be into the spring, if not into maybe the summer of '24, depending on how much of the final disposition on what the utilities are, what kind of conflicts we have with other utilities. Again, so we still have some questions to answer, but this is a substantial project. You know, it's going to take at least one full season.
I just want to comment on that too. The project I showed you with that square took 2 construction seasons. Half of it got built for one part, and it was done in a way that it was usable, and then we did the other half the next construction season.
Now, is that one side of the street, or is that one block of the street at a time?
Yeah, either way. And also, the length of the total project depends on how many phases you do. You want to keep the downtown operating as much as you can. If you close the entire thing and just reconstruct it, it would be very fast, but it would be very intrusive. Or you can do it in smaller stages over a longer period of time and keep things operating. So it's, again, a balancing act. We have to work out with the staff.
And you touched on this a little bit, Rob. Could you just walk us through a little bit of the decision-making process for why these are the streets that are being considered? I know that there are budget constraints, but you know, why Green and Pennington and not Washington and St. John's?
Sure. And the answer that I'm going to give you is because he told me so. It was actually part of the end of the Charette report, and there was prioritization, and it was through some of the comments from public outreach of what we saw as priority 1 through priority 4 in a descending order. So I think, again, focusing on the downtown area, with Washington Street being kind of the pinnacle, Pennington as connecting the civic spine, so trying to make the most impact with those, and then I think the 5 points, you know, and Green making that connection to the water and tying Washington was really kind of why that became priority 1, is my understanding, and then working backwards, you know, when we looked at the whole thing at a 10%. The cost was obviously going to be well in excess of what the city could afford at the time. So we had some discussions, and we came to this, you know, final confirmation of priority 1 area, and then let's see what that cost was. And we're still talking about, depending on where that final budget is, do we trim? We would recommend trimming any kind of length versus trimming any kind of finish. Because again, back to what Ian said, we're creating that space is what we're looking for. So it's not a matter of, can we do more footprint for the same price? It's really about doing the right things in the right footprint for the best price. So.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I really didn't realize I had that much authority during this run. But it was a consensus, and we batted around all sorts of ideas. I just want to talk a little bit about doing it right. So when we did the renaissance of the downtown West Palm Beach, the city had $7,000 in reserves, so it was broke. We didn't have a lot of money, and so we only did 2 blocks. But we needed a place, and those 2 blocks we used a lot for events and so on, and eventually we could afford to do another few blocks, and eventually we got to do the whole downtown. But it's really smart to do things right instead of do it halfway, because then by the time you're done, you got a halfway downtown, and it doesn't measure up, and you have to redo it again. So it's best to do it once, do it right, and pick your priorities. And this is what we came up with at the Charette. We think it's a good set of priorities, and then once that's successful, you can keep going.
I'm sorry. one of the things, the thought process, originally when we did the charrettes, we were looking at a much bigger footprint with our ARPA money. And I know this looks like a big consolidated, a lot smaller area, but I get, the theory behind this, and this is just how I look at things like food. Gotta remember, I teach 8th graders every day, so I have to simplify everything. So, I'd rather have a bundt cake that has 4 inches of chocolate icing than a sheet cake with half an inch. So, I mean, if that makes sense, I'd rather do less but amazingly awesome than more that just looks okay. So, with this as our starting point, and I'm glad you brought it up because that's how we think. With this as our starting point, as a couple years go by after it's finished, we can always add on another block and mimic the same design, with using our tax dollars, if it's successful, if it's something we want to add on to. So what we wanted to do was, what we did now, we wanted to do perfectly. I mean, if that makes sense, because a lot of people say, oh, you don't seem to be getting a lot done. I said, yeah, well, we could probably do more, but it wouldn't have the wow factor. You know what I mean? If that makes sense.
Yeah, just to reiterate, my question wasn't why aren't we doing it all? It was why was the priority Pennington and Green, and you answered that with the Civic Hub. I think it makes sense too on Pennington if we're going to see some use of the Star Center, that being our arts hub, and then the Opera House being along that same line. So I think that makes a lot of sense too. Thanks.
Absolutely.
Couple of questions. Are we doing the infrastructure on Pennington as well? Is infrastructure improvements going to be going on underground on Pennington?
We will be performing that infrastructure that we need to tie into the Washington and Green area. They're the ones that are in immediate need of replacement.
So we're not
Pennington
doing
is,
water and sewer line replacement on Pennington right now?
not at
We
this
are?
not at this moment.
Okay. And so that's that part of that question. So I'm dyslexic, and when I see this the shared space area in Russian Blue Plaza, scares the life out of me. And that's just me, and that's just my perspective of driving with it. So help me understand how, as a driver, I'm going to intuitively know that everybody knows where they're going, and I know where I'm going, and we all know the rules of the road.
That's a really good question. My son's dyslexic and he drives too, and we travel and we see places like this. But how it works is it's kind of analogous to a skating rink. Now, I'm going to tell you a little story. So imagine that no one had ever invented ice skating or skates. There's no such thing as a skating rink. And you come to city council and you say, and by the way, you have public works people who obsess about not having ponding on your streets in the winter, and because people are going to slip and fall. That's been your concern. You don't want liability. And then someone comes in here and says, you know what, we're going to make this big sheet of slippery ice out in the public realm, and we're going to invite people to strap razor-sharp blades on the bottom of their feet. We're not going to post up any rules about what direction they're supposed to go, and we're going to let them loose on this sheet of ice without any special training, and we'll just see what happens. And what happens all over the world is they go counterclockwise. The beginners stick near the boards. The folks who are better go in the middle and spin and all the things the figure skaters do. And then the better skaters are further away from the boards and they skate. And there's very few crashes. And it's because people inherently know how to walk and not crash into each other. And because of the speeds that will be present in the shared space or the calmed areas, is that through just your normal human ability to walk and everything will help you get through these places. And that has worked more successfully than conventionally designed intersections with all the different
With
traffic
stop
control
signs
areas.
and stuff like that.
Yeah, with center lines and
Are there
all
stop
of-
signs anywhere?
There are stop signs there.
Everywhere, does everybody get a stop sign?
Everybody who enters into that space gets a stop sign before they get in.
Okay.
So they enter in slowly, and the nature of the place makes them stay slow. And there's a convention that if you come across another driver, you stay to the right. And no one's going to forget that and try and go to the left. So it just really works well if the speeds are low, and that's the intent, and that's why it's so safe.
And we're removing then the rule that you can't go this way? Oh, hold on. Going down Washington, turning on St. John, I guess to the right there. You're not allowed to do
Be
that
doing
now.
that now.
Are we removing that? That stays?
Turn.
Yeah, so we're going to maintain the right turn prohibition from Washington to St. John, and that's based on auto turn templates, and you just physically can't, with a design vehicle, whether it's a standard box truck or delivery truck, can't make that turn without basically,
Going back and forth.
encumbering
Yeah.
quite a bit.
Okay. So all the rules stay the same. It's just that there's, well, we don't really have lines there now. It'll just be a bigger space there
Yeah, and I.
because of going, like, taking away that one sidewalk there?
Yep. So we've opened it a bit, so it does get pulled open a little bit more, but so yeah, it's very similar. And like Ian said, like with that slide, like it drops into that Swedish scenario. And just like that, we're going to change the pavers as well. So it's a different pattern than, so it's going to very much look different than Washington, and then St. John is asphalt. So it's already cueing the drivers that this is a different space. You're a guest here. So it's really kind of all of those things coming together and kind of, pushing that sense of how the driver should behave.
In my head, I'm just thinking of some of those nightmare intersections in Puerto Rico, and everybody just, and you're right, nobody runs into each other really. Somehow it works, but if you're not from there, it's the most frightening thing you've ever experienced.
I've driven in Puerto Rico too.
Right.
I agree with you, but this is
Yeah.
not, luckily, Puerto Rico.
Right. Okay. So again, so there is it looks like a light post. It's where the light post is there.
This one?
Yeah.
Yep.
Is the light post just like out in the middle there, or is there going to be a delineation of the?
Yeah, we're going to show you the picture of the place in Sweden again to show you how they did the lighting. I wonder where can I point at this where the people watching on television can see? Is there any
Yeah.
place I can point?
We have somebody.
Again?
There's somebody in the control room that can help with
Okay, so if I point at this, they can see it?
that. With the mouse.
Oh. So it doesn't absorb my finger though. So that's the light pole, and that's a light pole. That's how they light the whole thing with those two big poles, and then
Okay.
there's art. And if you go to the next slide, you can see the art. This is the art here. That's the art. You can see the light pole. But it's, if I was a lawyer, I would call it clear and apparent. And that's why it works. You just make it legible and clear, and folks know not to drive into the pole. It's pretty straightforward. And we can show you more examples of shared spaces, and they're all designed to invoke a sense of calm and sharedness, and that's why they work so well.
So in this picture here, what is this line right here?
Oh, those lines are at a 30% level. The guides, if you have a vision impairment, you can follow those. They're tactile guides, basically. You probably won't notice them as an able-bodied person, but if you have a vision disability, you can sense it with your foot. And so you can follow it. Some people follow it with their left foot, some follow with the right. Some people walk on top of it, and some people use their cane. But it's a,
So be slightly raised?
no, it's, you know those truncated domes you find at crosswalks, the warning surfaces? It's the same size as one of those domes, but it's lengthened to be about the size of a cigar. And you can tell when you step on it, it's not a warning surface, but it's a guide surface, and so you follow them.
Okay.
If you want, we can provide you some more material on that, but it's kind of cool. Like in places like Japan and Australia, they're the best countries in the world for this tactile guidance, and we're trying to write some guidance that we want to use across the country for this. And so we looked all over the world for the best examples, and there's some countries that are quite advanced at it, and we want to take what we find around it and adapt it to the North American environment, and that's what we think is best practices for the North American environment with our ADA rules. But it's a guide, and where there's a junction, there's a little warning surface that lets people know that there's a junction, or at a crossing, anything like that. It's like, it makes like a tactile map so people can find their way around. And at some important buildings, we can have a guide to the door. Like if you're going up the Pennington and you come to one of the public buildings, it could guide you to the door, for example. And it becomes a nice thing for people to follow. And there's also apps folks get with their phone, so the combination of the app that can talk to you, or the apps that can actually see these little, they're like QR codes, but for guidance. You can start adding other things to this, and it becomes, your phone almost becomes like your eyes, and can read these things and tell you what buildings nearby. And so it's the physical part of a broader approach of being accessible for people with
That's
vision
very
disabilities.
interesting. Thank you.
So one thing we were trying to do is help future-proof this, because this is coming into the United States at some point. And we're on the cutting edge of that thinking. And it'd be nice just to get it done now, so you don't have to retrofit it later. That's the idea. And some of these other technologies will be coming as well, and you can add those much more easily than change these physical things. So we think it positions you better for the next 10 or 20 years than you would be otherwise.
No question from council.
No, sir, not at this time. You've done a wonderful job. I thank you so much. There's a lot to digest here. I thank you so much.
Okay, we thank you for the Christmas present.
Our pleasure.
When my wife asked me what I want for Christmas, I said, I just want 30% engineering design, and I got it.
Call me Santa Claus.
No,
I
I'm
guess,
kidding.
right?
No, thank you. Like I say, it's been great working with you. Thank you very much for honoring the vision of our citizens through the charrette process. And like I say, we have a lot to digest, but like I say, I guess how I feel is throughout this process, everyone that lives in Havre de Grace, everyone's favorite topic in a coffee shop is how Havre de Grace could be better. You know, if we only had this store, or if we only changed this street, or if this parking looked like this, and it's the topic of every bar, every coffee shop conversation for years. And so we all had a preconceived vision of what it could look like. And when we consult the professionals, you guys come back and you give us ideas we probably never considered before. And like I say, that is the things some of it was like, yeah, great idea. Some of it took us by surprise, and I know a lot of people have to get used to it. But at the same time, here in Havre de Grace, we want to be different. We don't want to be like everybody else. We never have been like anybody else. And we like to always lead, and we like to be innovative, and that's our trademark. And you've given us a lot of ideas that just looking at it, you can tell it's going to be very innovative. We might not be the first ones in the world to do it, but we definitely are the first ones in the region to do something like this, which gives us a lot of contemplation and thinking about. So it's exciting things that you gave us, and like I said, we look forward to the next step. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Yes, sir. Anything else?
I was just gonna say thank you.
And finally, I just want to thank my citizens for dropping in to listen to the presentation. Again, if you have comments or questions, shoot us an email, call us up, come to the next council meeting. You know how to get in touch with us, or maybe you can bump into a council member after the meeting. So thank you very much, everybody.